President Biden downplaying the China threat last night in his State of the Union address. Watch this.
I've heard many of my Republican and Democratic friends say that China is on the rise and America's falling behind. They've got it backwards. America's rising. I want competition with China, not conflict. And we're in a stronger position to win the conflict of the 21st century against China than anyone else for that matter.
Joining me right now to talk more about that is Gatestone Institute Senior Fellow and author of The Coming Collapse of China and China is Going to War, Gordon Chang, back with us. Gordon, he says that repeatedly. He wants competition with China, not conflict. But when the Communist Party is putting conflict on a silver platter in front of you, you actually need to respond. There were no comments whatsoever last night about all of the aggression coming out of communist China, including the decades of intellectual property theft, surveillance on American citizens, a surveillance balloon, fentanyl flowing into the country, killing 100,000 Americans in fentanyl poisoning, not to mention support for the other adversaries of the world, and that is Russia and Iran, and all of the Chinese nationals coming through the southern border. No comments on any of that.
Yes, and when he talked about fentanyl last night, which he did in two places, he didn't say the important word, which is China. You know, the Chinese call us an enemy. They declared a quote-unquote people's war on us in May 2019, a phrase which Americans may say is just propaganda, but which has great meaning for the Communist Party. They call that total war. And we need a president who will say, oh, no, we need a president who will say China is an enemy. But Biden won't even call them an adversary. And that's a failure because many of the problems he talked about last night begin in Beijing, and he did not address that at all.
Well, why not? I mean, why isn't he mentioning the U.S.'s #1 adversary? Why isn't he mentioning all of these efforts by communist China to undermine America?
There are only three possibilities: that he is misguided and naive, that he's corrupt, or he's a traitor. Pick your choice. I don't know what's inside of his mind, but we have seen some very disturbing behavior from President Biden when it comes to China. So, for instance, you know, we talk about all of these, you know, you went through the list, and there are, of course, some more. But, you know, just to take one, you know, on his very first day in office, he allowed into the U.S., he repealed a President Trump's executive order banning the importation into the United States of electrical grid equipment made by China, even though there was evidence that China was sabotaging these before sending them to the U.S. That is just incomprehensible to me. So, you know, I don't know what the answer to your question is, but the American people need to start asking questions and need to start demanding their president talk to them about this.
Right. And he also, in the first week in office, canceled the China initiative, right? I mean, the China initiative was quite successful. Secretary Pompeo and President Trump put through the China initiative, which was indicting anybody who was sending intellectual property, stealing intellectual property and sending it to communist China and surveilling American citizens. That's why they closed down the Houston embassy. That's why they indicted the professor at Harvard, et cetera, et cetera. He canceled that. Now, James Comer will tell you that they've got $30 million that has gone directly to Joe Biden from China and others, 170 suspicious activity reports, the gift of a Porsche from Kazakhstan and 2 diamonds from China, as well as perjury and FARA violations. That from Chairman Comer. So what you say in terms of number 2, him being compromised, is certainly a possibility. The president also failed to mention TikTok in his State of the Union last night, Gordon. The House Energy and Commerce Committee unanimously voted yesterday to move forward with bipartisan legislation that would give ByteDance, the owner of TikTok, 6 months to divest TikTok or risk being banned from the U.S. app stores. Are they really going to do it? Will Biden do it while he's actually on TikTok regularly doing campaigning to young people? House Majority Leader Steve Scalise posted this on X after the vote, saying he plans to bring the bill to the House for a vote next week. TikTok is trying to stop this bill, Gordon. A new notice on the app is warning users of a total ban. The social media platform is directing users to call their lawmakers to stop a shutdown of the Chinese-owned app. Gordon, your thoughts?
Well, certainly. We know that TikTok poses 2 primary national security threats: the continual theft of data from users as well as China using the app to propagate its narratives, and including narratives like promoting illegal drug use. We know that they exacerbate political divisions in the United States. They propagate Russian disinformation about the Ukraine war. We know all of this. And, you know, Biden himself banned the use of TikTok on federal devices. And yet during the Super Bowl this year, his Biden HQ joined the app, and it played that video, "Hey, LOL, guys." So really what we're talking about is a president who is using for political purposes an app which is known to be a danger to the United States. I don't understand this. And by the way, one of the first things that Biden did when he came to office, he also reversed President Trump's efforts to ban TikTok and WeChat from the United States. That shows a president who is allowing China to continue to attack the United States.
Right. Why? And those three reasons are spot on, Gordon. Why? Why would he do this? By the way, you go on TikTok right now. You can find videos on TikTok of all the instructions about how to breach America, how to get into the country illegally. So the Chinese are actually directing all of these illegal migrants to come into America. Also, again, undermining the United States. And then there's this from the Wall Street Journal. The Journal reporting, quote, congressional probe of Chinese-built cargo cranes deployed at ports throughout the country has found communications equipment that does not appear to support normal operations, and that the installed components in some cases include cellular modems that could be remotely accessed. What a surprise. Chinese-made cranes all over the country at U.S. ports are now being compromised by the Chinese Communist Party, potentially. Gordon, this is no surprise to you. These cranes are made in China. Why are they being used at our ports?
That's a great question, because really we know that China is using its supply of critical infrastructure to the U.S. to monitor and probably for acts of sabotage, because I'm sure that on the first day of a war, those cranes would not operate because of those modems. This is on us, though, because we know that the Chinese have been doing this for decades. And it's, surveillance cameras, it's electrical grid equipment, as we just talked about. It's these cranes. And we don't do anything to protect ourselves. This is Republicans and Democrats. So really what we need, the American people, to be outraged at both political parties for failing to deal with a known threat.
Yeah, absolutely. But we also need to understand what else is made in China that could be undermining our own personal lives. What else are we buying that is made in China that could work against us?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is everything and anything that we buy from China. So really what we're talking about is a full-fledged assault on the American Republic by China. They use every point of contact to take down our country, including the supply of critical infrastructure, and simple things could be like food. So really what we're talking about is a Chinese assault on us.
Wow. Gordon, thank you. We'll keep watching it as we have been. Gordon Chang joining us on Communist China.